Well, just years ago, it would have been unthinkable to hear such words spoken in public in China, but slogans like "We want freedom" and even "Xi Jinping step down" rang out in Shanghai over the weekend. The protests that took place across the country over China's strict zero-COVID policy are unprecedented since Xi Jinping took power a decade ago. They were sparked by anger over a deadly fire in the western city of Urumqi, with speculation that the lockdown there hindered residents from escaping or being rescued. Well, for the very latest, we can speak to our regional correspondent, Yenna Lee in Seoul. Yenna, you spoke to an eyewitness who was at those protests in Shanghai over the weekend. What did you hear from them?
Well, I spoke to a longtime Shanghai resident who told me about her excitement at witnessing what she calls a historic moment. She wasn't a protester herself. She says she was just an onlooker because she lives right on that street in Shanghai where those protests took place. And she said that the chants of "We don't want PCRs, we want freedom" really resonated with her, and that she was hopeful that the government would make some changes to that strict zero-COVID policy. For her, it's not about regime change per se, but really she just wants to be able to live normally. For many Shanghai residents, what happened in Urumqi last Thursday, that fire in that residential flat, this is something that could have happened to any of them, because Shanghai too lived through a very strict lockdown earlier this year, and there were reports of people dying or becoming very sick because of the lack of access to medical care. So when videos of that fire circulated online, there was a lot of anger. The Shanghai resident I spoke to said that she felt absolute rage when she found out that something like this could still happen 3 years on into the pandemic. Of course, the gatherings, those protests on Saturday and Sunday in Shanghai took place on a street called Urumqi Road, and it started off as a memorial for the victims of that fire. And there were people holding up those pieces of A4 paper, blank pieces of paper, clearly referring to the country's vast censorship program. And there were also chants against the zero-COVID policy, as well as some voices demanding that President Xi Jinping step down. Those anti-CCP voices, though, are, of course, incredibly rare. They are a minority. Most people are asking for the simplest of things online. One of those slogans that have been going around is, "I want to be able to go out and watch a movie." So very simple things that people are asking for there. And similar scenes could be seen not just in Shanghai, but in Beijing, in Chengdu, in Wuhan, and on several university campuses over the weekend. A website called What's on Weibo that tracks social media trends in China says that people online have been calling this the A4 revolution. Now, what's interesting to note as well is that police have largely let those protests in Shanghai take place without much of an incident, without cracking down too harshly, and neither on Saturday or Sunday, though several protesters were detained.
So, you know, police letting these protests continue, but what response have we had from Chinese officials?
Well, what's happening has almost certainly reached the eyes and ears of China's leadership, and there have been sporadic protests in the past. We saw earlier this month the anger at the Foxconn factory. We saw images of that one-man protester in Beijing in October, but these were either very localized in one place or very small. This weekend, what happened really was quite remarkable. No official government response yet, but local authorities have changed their tune a little bit. Sunday, Beijing authorities announced that they've officially banned barricades outside residential buildings, saying, I quote, "Passengers must remain clear for medical transport and emergency rescue operations," because right now the largest district in Beijing, Chaoyang, is under an unofficial semi-lockdown, if you will, with scores of buildings cordoned off and residents of other buildings encouraged to stay at home. Saturday, before the protests went nationwide, but after local protests in Urumqi officials actually announced that they would ease some measures. They said that residents would be able to leave their homes in staggered periods. Of course, it must be noted that earlier November, the central government did ease some coronavirus measures, shortening quarantine periods, etc. But these are all incremental changes that many clearly have yet to feel the benefits of.
And Yana, China did see a new record of COVID infections just this Monday. Could the country afford to lift these measures completely?
Well, China is going through its worst coronavirus outbreak since the pandemic, over 30,000 new cases a day. But for a population of over 1.4 billion, it might not seem like a lot. However, the population lacks natural immunity. Most people have never caught COVID-19. And there's also a vaccine gap, especially for the most vulnerable. Only 60% of over 80s have yet to receive a booster shot. And Bloomberg estimates that if China were to reverse its strict policy and relax its measures, 5.8 million people would need an ICU bed, except that the country only has 4 beds per 100,000 people. So we're in this extremely delicate situation where authorities do have to figure out where to go next and how.
All right, Yana, big questions there. Thank you very much for that update on the situation in China. That's France 24's regional correspondent, Yana Lee.